Alright, so stuff is coming out so quickly and kind of all at once that I guess the next couple of videos, these two consecutive videos, are going to essentially be the movies that are from this past week. So let's go ahead and start with these three, and then we'll see what else happens. And I think we're going to start with Uncharted. And I probably should say right away, before anything else, that I go into this movie with not really any expectations because I am not a gamer, like, much at all, nor have I really ever been much outside of, like, Mario and shit. That's about the extent that I know. And I'm not one of those people that, like, looks down on gaming or anything like that. It's just not something that I'm into. So I really have no, like, reference point for this or any context to these characters or anything like that. So the only thing I do know is apparently this is supposed to be like a prequel of sorts to whatever the games were. And so so either this opinion is going to be meaningless to you, or it'll be something based on that, which I don't know how many people that are talking about this uh, know, like, everything going into it or not, or if I'm in, like, I imagine I'm in a really, really tiny minority. So yeah, so if you think that makes my opinion of this invalid, then I guess you can just stop here and go to something else. So, but I guess going into this, the only thing I was really that excited about was the fact that Antonio Banderas was in it. So the joke is on me, I guess. I think he's in it for what, less than 10 minutes maybe. So going into it, I do know that it is an adventure movie with Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland, and a lot of people saying that they're miscast. Once again, I have no context for this, so I just kind of saw it as this sort of generic thing. Like, that's kind of what I assumed, based on just, like, a couple of stills and poster that I'd seen. So I had heard about, it's supposed to be Indiana Jones-like, and it's going to be in, like, that adventure vein, and I imagine usually Romancing the Stone is probably something that can be comparable as well. And yeah, I can kind of see where that's coming from as it goes on, but I kind of felt like there's always something that happens at the beginning of a lot of movies, and this one does it too. And it's something that always makes me worry because it makes me feel like, sort of like the filmmakers don't have trust in the audience or something, or they're afraid that they won't be able to grab the audience right away with their story. So we start with an action scene that's going to be happening later, and then we're eventually going to circle back around. It's one of those that starts that way. And I always feel like that's such a desperate and unconfident move to try to draw the audience in immediately. And it's really just the equivalent of, like, when you're watching a TV show, and just as it's going to commercials, it says coming up, and it shows you, like, the best bits of what you're about to see. And then just kind of ruins the impact of those when they come around. That's basically what this is. What this whole opening scene is that the equivalent of that coming up thing that is the bane of TV shows. So, as far as it being an adventure movie, once it gets going, though, I did find that the word generic just seemed to be really going through my head. Like, I thought about that when I saw, the promotional stuff, but I mean, it was really early in the movie also, where it was like, I kind of feel like I've already seen this, and it's not even, movies that are considered great, like Raiders of the Lost Ark or something like that, or even Romancing the Stone. But there's also a lot of middle ground movies, and there's always those movies that hope people will compare them to, Indiana Jones and stuff like that. But it's like, when they really set out for this, all I ever really end up seeing it, like, it feels so rare for them to actually capture enough to say, oh, it feels like the modern day version of this, or this, previous movie character or something, or this movie series or whatever. It's always, oh, this is just a lesser version of those things. And it's like, you can always see that they're trying to reach that point, but at the same time, it's almost like they're not motivated enough to try to reach the heights of something like that, so they just settle for, oh, I want to be told that I'm a somewhat reminder of that thing. And that's setting the bar pretty low, and that's eventually where everything's going to stay, if that's all the effort that you end up putting into it. And I know a lot of people thought that the director was kind of a red flag also, Ruben Fleischer, but the thing about him is that I actually kind of like him in the sense that, he's done Zombieland and Gangster Squad and Venom, And I stand by that. I think Gangster Squad is kind of underrated, personally. And Venom is what we all know what Venom is. And the thing about these three movies in particular is, even if they aren't like aesthetically pleasing, they're so lively and energetic and like chaotic and stylized that there's some kind of fun to them, whether they're good or bad. Like, a lot of people would tell you that Zombieland is legitimately good. A lot of people would tell you that Gangster Squad and Venom are legitimately bad. But I don't. All three of those, there's just something that I kind of like about them anyway, and that I've gone back to them multiple times. And he knows how to do that sort of over the top stylized kind of thing in this really fun way. I think, even if it's in a guilty pleasure way. Sometimes I get that vibe in this, but not a lot. And it's a lot of, like, especially when you look at the action, where it's going to be one of those movies that seems like it's trying really hard to stay busy. And not in that, charmingly chaotic way I was talking about with the other three, but that way where a lot of the action just feels empty, and it's just here for like the sake of like almost being filler. Like, when we're introduced to a character, and it is like to I guess introduce the type of character that they are. A chase begins. Like, she takes something of theirs, and they have to chase her over the rooftops and shit like that. And it's, if you've seen one rooftop chase, you've seen this rooftop chase. And the thing about this is, it's going to eventually circle. Like, obviously she's untrustworthy because she takes this thing, but then once they catch up to her, she becomes an ally. So it's like, they started off as like, maybe this is a possible ally, to, yeah, she's an ally. So all of that middle ground of that chase sequence is just superfluous. But then you could argue that it's setting up that this character is untrustworthy. But that's the thing also, is it's lose-lose, because now you're setting up a character that's one of the most annoying, predictable tropes that a character can be, the flip-flop character, where a character goes back and forth as to whether they're an ally or not, so many times that very early on you just stop giving a fuck and you really don't care. And it's like, the closer that they get to the person, you're just automatically assume, oh, this probably won't last because they're a flip-flop character, because we've seen this character a billion times before. And it's really tries hard to throw in some sort of unpredictability when they use a character like this, but it's so, like, there's so many things, like, you can throw around the word generic pretty easily and overuse it, but it's like every single aspect of this movie, I feel like I could say, if you've seen this type of thing in one movie, you've definitely seen it in this movie for sure, like, identically. And that's all it is. It's just like a series of shit that we've pretty much seen before, from scene to scene to scene, whether it be action scenes or characters or, the whole feel, the way they use the genre, just everything about it. So, talking about character also, when you do reach these moments where the action has to pause, and, because Screenwriting 101 tells you that these characters need to have some sort of emotional thing going on between them, and you can pick from, like, one of these three cliches, and, that's it. No other effort is needed. So, this script decided on characters keeping something from another character, which means there's going to be a secret that's being kept, a couple of characters know, one is pushing one to tell that one, and then when it finally happens, it's going to be like, they're going to get angry, they're going to break up, they're going to sulk, but then they'll eventually come back around and just end the conflict abruptly, because they realize the runtime of the movie is getting to, oh, this is about where the climax comes in, so I guess we better make up. And it's like, okay, I guess I forgive you for that thing, whatever. And it just all feels so pointless. Like, everything that happens in this movie, pretty much, feels like it's just serving the purpose of a really boring script, that was at the bottom of somebody's drawer, and then it was just like, oh, this, like, there's a video game with this concept, we'll just call it that. That's what it feels like. It doesn't even necessarily feel like it would be the official script of something. It's almost like it was just a generic script, and they, like, retooled, like, character names or something, if I had to guess. That's what it feels like. And as far as if any charm can come out of this, as far as, like, performances, Wahlberg's just kind of here. Wahlberg doesn't have to do much other than, be Wahlberg, I guess, here. Be like, the seasoned guy that's sick of everybody's shit and has, been doing this for a while. as far as Holland goes, um, I think I'm already on this train where I'm just kind of bored of Holland at this point, which isn't his fault, because like when you're the new big name, it's gonna be Hollywood that's saying, oh, here's every single thing under the sun that you're gonna do now, and I do think it will be interesting if he can finally make enough money to where, not that he's not with Spider-Man already, but like he's just gonna do this less interesting shit. I'm really hoping he'll be one of those ones like Daniel Radcliffe and Pattinson, where it's like now he'll make his money and then he'll just do weird shit for a while, or at least exciting shit, and not being given all this, because it's not necessarily just that it seems like Hollywood's just kind of giving him everything under the sun now, whether he's appropriate for the role or not. But it's always like boring or obvious choices. And this would be one of those, and it's like, because we're kind of and I guess, I don't know if it's just Spider-Man still so fresh or what, but it is like, you just kind of only really see one character when you look at him, even if obviously, Nate in this isn't as, awkward as Peter Parker is, it's still just, watching Tom Holland jump around and, all that other stuff, and just do the whole generic action-y thing. But we know that he can act. We've seen The Impossible. So, and and he did the James Gray movie. It's, there's something here in Tom Holland that's certainly worthwhile. It's just a matter of how much longer he's going to have to do shit like this before he can, really branch out and do something that's actually interesting. So, not that I don't love Spider-Man, just, it's nice to see actors expand a little bit. And this clearly is not that. And we eventually do get toward, even before we get to a climax, and the climax is fun to an extent, but the problem with a lot of the action in this, whether it be the scene that we see at the beginning or this, big climax, is CGI. It's so weird that we are in 2022, and filmmakers just still cannot master CGI. I mean, obviously there's plenty that have, and there's a lot of CGI that is so good that it goes unseen. But that really visible CGI that looks almost incomplete is also running rampant as much as ever. And here it's really, really bad. And like I don't know if it's just that we're in like a post Mission Impossible area now, but like any scene of people falling out of planes now just looks so incredibly fake by comparison. Going back to Mark Wahlberg with his movie last year with Chiwetel, Infinite, I think it was called. It was so terrible I almost forgot its name. There's like a plane scene in that too, and you can just constantly see the green screens, and it's like the bar has already been set by other movies. Not that I want actors or stuntmen to constantly risk their lives for entertainment, but like I say, there is a bar now, and shitty CGI is not even trying to reach the bar, let alone surpass it. And when we see, this CGI Tom Holland flopping around the air, there's going to be no real suspense or thrills here. And I was thinking about the climax especially, because like when you think about adventure movies like, Raiders or Romancing the Stone or something like that, the Goonies started to come to mind as well. And I was thinking about how obviously all the sets and all that stuff are obviously real in the Goonies, practical. And I was wondering, like, everything here just looks so incredibly fake, but I wonder, like, are there going to be kids that are watching this right now that feel about it the way, we feel watching, like, the Goonies or something? And I can maybe see that, I guess, if these kids are like really, generous, I guess, but it's hard for me to imagine, because I feel like with what's happening, the climax of this movie could have been like mind-blowing, but just everything looks so fake and just completely sucks all that adventure out of it. And that's the thing, is like, I was trying to figure out, because I almost wanted to go into this by saying, I'm not really that much into the adventure movie anymore, but I wonder if it's not necessarily that I'm not as interested in the genre, it's just that the genre hasn't been done right in like a really long time. I feel like the most recent adventure movie I really, really loved was The Rundown. And next year, The Rundown will be 20 years old. So I don't know how to feel about that, but I would like to see this genre really reinvigorated. And I honestly, I don't want to condescend to anybody, but I almost feel like some people will just kind of accept this movie begrudgingly if they want badly enough for the adventure genre to come back with a vengeance. And it'll be like, oh, I see the ideas in this, and oh man, it's really close. We'll just say, oh, this made me feel like an adventure movie again. It felt like a classic adventure movie, but it really doesn't. It looks so fucking fake and animated. I can only assume that the video game looks nicer, and it's obviously video games are animation, and it probably looks a lot more real if I had to guess. Because to my understanding, even though I'm not much of a gamer, the games are starting to look more and more and more real, and it's like movies like this are starting to look faker and faker and faker, and it's I feel like the reverse is happening here that should be, but yeah, so I don't know. I don't like hate this. Like it wasn't a miserable experience or anything, but it's just like every single beat of it just felt like, oh, this has been done before, or oh, I see what they're trying to invoke here. It's like, oh, they're trying to be this thing, but they're not quite getting there. This is supposed to remind us of other movies instead of it trying to be its own thing. And yeah, and there's not really enough coming from like the cast or anything like that, or the action. Certainly not. To elevate it beyond saying, you know what, fuck it, this is a good time. Because to me, it really wasn't. It's just a time. It's just, there's no, up or down or anything. It's just, yeah, I watched a movie the day that I watched this. That's it. That's all I can really say about it. So, yeah, that was a lot of talking to just come to a destination that's nothing, which is basically like spending 2 hours watching this movie. So there's that. Let's go on to the second movie, which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Apparently, the marketing consulted Sean Parker, and they dropped the so that's how they're going to differentiate themselves as a sequel, or a requel, as we learned through the new Scream. So going into this, it does seem like, a not so great idea. Because these new Texas Chainsaw movies have not been exactly hitting it out of the park. I thought the 3D one wasn't as bad as everybody else did, but it certainly had, like, cringy moments. And then that Leatherface movie that came out in 2017 was so bad that I have almost completely forgotten it entirely. Like, I don't think I could tell you a single thing that happens in it. So now we have this one, and Netflix is putting it out. So it's like, with Netflix's track record and Texas Chainsaw's current track record, this was not looking good. Expectations were past the floor. So when it started, you could tell they were trying to win us over as much as they possibly could, because John Larroquette is doing the narration again. And then when it completely pans out, we realize not only is it John Larroquette doing it again, but this is like this sort of documentary that we're seeing that exists within the world of the movie. And we're in like this gas station shop that has been cashing in and on merchandising for what happened in the events of the original movie in this town. And then, I mean, it's not a new idea. We saw it in like Tremors and stuff like that. But I still thought they handled that well. They did it in a pretty downplayed way for the kind of movie that this is. They did that in just a way that I actually thought it really worked. And obviously that means that we're doing the retcon thing again, where we're cutting out all movies except the original, and we're going straight from there, because that's, all the rage now. And we're introduced to our new set of characters. I only recognize like a couple of these actors. I think Jacob Lattimore, I think I've seen in a couple of things, and Elsie Fisher from 8th grade, which is interesting. I didn't recognize her for a little while, but then when it set in, it was like, oh, I thought she'd go on to more prestigious things after 8th grade, but okay. Usually horror is where you start before you really, really take off, I suppose, for a lot of people. But looking into this, they did also set up very well admittedly, what the first movie set not as effectively, but they still set up that idea of feeling trapped because of the people that you run into, where it's like everything kind of looks like a dead zone, but then they meet, that shady guy in the truck, and they get stopped by the cops, and there's just this trapped feeling. That feeling I talked about when we've talked multiple times about the original movie, and what I love about it is how trapped it makes you feel, where like every possible turn feels like somebody in the Sawyer family is going to be there. And it makes you feel like you're in this inescapable place. And it's also a place that you never should have been in the first place, is the vibe that you get. And this one actually set that up pretty well as well. So when we go into, obviously there's a lot of things going on here that are meant to be like topical, and I think that's where it kind of comes in with a bit of a it's very heavy-handed in some circumstances. Other times they kind of try to play it up for comedy, in this weird sort of cathartic thing, I guess, in regards to some of the characters that are killed, which was kind of giving me uncomfortable vibes of Bobcat Goldthwait's movie God Bless America, which is a movie that, like, I understand feeling frustrated, but it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. That was kind of where I felt like a lot of this was going, especially the other places it was trying to be topical really might leave a bad taste, and just be uncomfortable more than adding some sort of profound quality to it. But obviously the main thing to notice here, that is unavoidable, is them taking the David Gordon Green Halloween approach, where not only are we retconning every movie but the first, but we're bringing back the original, final girl to confront him again. And, yeah, the thing about this, first of all, is it makes you wonder if it was a good... Because apparently they had the idea a while back, when Marilyn Burns and Gunnar Hansen were still with us. And then, I don't know, you would think... And depending on how, really invested in the idea you are, and if it's something that you really, really think is going to be something great, something that you absolutely have to make, you would think that the deaths of Marilyn Burns and Gunnar Hansen, which were pretty close together, would make you think, okay, I guess this idea isn't a go now. Because the big thing about David Gordon Green's Halloween was the fact that it was Jamie Lee Curtis, and it was Nick Castle, and all this stuff, and, Carpenter with the music, all this stuff that was, like, the same aspects that were there, that were able to make that original movie, are actually back here doing this again, and it feels like, an actual... Like usually retconning is this thing where it's like you just have to program your brain to say, oh, I guess we gotta forget this and all that. But seeing, Jamie Lee Curtis with the long hair and stuff like that, and just details like that there are little things that go a long way, were able to make it enough that it felt like it was still that world. Obviously we're just talking about the 2018 when Kills kind of, no pun intended, killed that whole thing, that whole vibe, but that's another conversation. So here, we do have Sally come back, played by a different actress. The woman from Mandy. It took me, like, I was watching the movie going, like, I know I've seen her in something. Yeah, she's the cult woman in Mandy. And now she's the hero of a horror movie, interestingly enough. And we have Leatherface. And there was a criticism I had in the two new Halloween movies, the 2018 one and Kills, and that is that Michael seems like he's too brutal these days, especially for being as old as he is. Because Michael was just a stabby, strangling character, and now he just, like, rips you to pieces in the new movies, despite the fact that he's 40 years older. That he's literally an old dude now. Now, the thing about that, the conflicting thing about that, is that Leatherface is a character that I would buy, ripping you to pieces. Like, the kills that are in the new Halloween movies seem much more suited for Leatherface. Then there's the point where, he breaks a guy's arm and then stabs him with the broken bone. And it's like, oh, okay, from Leatherface I buy that. But there is one thing that the movie doesn't seem to address, and that is the fact that this movie is supposed to be, like, 50 years later. Which puts Leatherface at, like, pushing 80. So, we don't really see much, like normal, we don't really see much of Leatherface, but even so, you get the vibe that this guy's not pushing 80 at all. And it's, maybe you want to suspend, disbelief in some way. Like I was talking about, how important it is to do that when you watch the original movie, where it's like, logic takes a holiday and stuff like this. But the thing is, like, especially when you get to stuff like the way everything's grounded in a horror movie. Like, the thing that made the original Halloween so scary was the fact that everything was so real, and then before it was a cliche, Michael kept coming back seemingly from the dead. Like, every time Laurie thought she had killed him, he would sit back up and come back, and it's like the fact that you add that quality at the very end of a movie that was so grounded otherwise, that's the scary part of it. Like, we just see it as a cliche now and supernatural now, but that's a scary thing. So whenever, Leatherface seems down in this movie, he keeps coming back up. Like, that's something that I feel like calls that back a little bit. So that I was like, any time Leatherface had something happen to him where he clearly should be dead and he still came back, that I'm fine with. It's the fact that the fact that he's supposed to be like pushing 80 is the weird thing. Like, that's the part that's tripping me up and like halting me despite all this. But I guess to get past that, there is some stuff in here that is surprisingly effective, much more than I thought it would be, because when you think about them making a new Texas Chainsaw movie and releasing it on Netflix, usually means they're looking for a certain demographic. You think maybe in the 15 to 18 range, given some of their approaches here. But when your expectations are that low, scenes like there's a scene in a van where one of our characters is in the front seat with everybody else dead, and Leatherface is on the outside. And this scene goes on for it feels like an eternity. And while usually that would be a criticism, it works incredibly well at building suspense. Because after, like, it really toys with you over and over again about where Leatherface is in the vicinity of this character when we're only focused on this character inside the van. And we can't see where he is outside of it. We just know he's outside somewhere. And they really take the time to toy with the audience in this scene in a really effective way. In, you might say, an expert way, as far as building suspense and horror and stuff like that. And that's a really good scene. And that was when I thought, like, in general, like, okay, maybe I should give this movie a little more credit, because there are putting some effort into this, which is a lot more than I thought. Just some effort is a lot more than I thought we were getting. So there's that. And surprisingly, another thing is that and maybe you might see this as a criticism, but it helps a lot, especially when you've seen too many horror movies. There's scenes when Leatherface is walking around and one of our main characters is hiding. And of course it's going to be in like a dark place, like windows are boarded up and stuff like that. And there's a lot of horror movies, even good horror movies fall into this trap, and that is having too many scenes where characters are wandering around in pitch blackness, and you're just waiting for something to happen. It's good for building suspense, but a lot of the times they overstay their welcome, and after a while it just gets tedious and tiresome and redundant. But the scenes like this that take place in the dark are surprisingly well lit. And not well lit in the sense of, what the fuck, this thing's supposed to be dark, why is it so light? But letting the audience see what's happening feels like such a rarity in movies like these. And it's like, it's nice that they had that courtesy to where it's like, you can still tell things are dark, but we can actually see what's happening. It's really nice. And it's like, you would think more filmmakers would pick up on it, but surprisingly enough, it feels rare. So I was really happy about that as well. But while all this stuff is well done, it's still, the characters aren't that great, and the characters don't necessarily have to be, like, it's not like the characters in the original movie are that memorable outside of, like, Sally and Franklin and stuff like that. Characters being, like, the inevitable victims. Obviously, Nubbins and Grandpa and stuff like that are all going to be really memorable characters. And it's... But, yeah, and I still stand by that the dinner scene in the original movie is the scariest scene in movie history. But here there's not really anything that's that particularly frightening in that sense. It's very, very gore focused when there really wasn't a lot of that in the original. Same thing you could say about, Halloween, where it's like now that we have the means to show you the gore, that's pretty much all we're really focused on after a while. I really talk about that scene in the van, but a lot of the suspense in this is not that. Like that's a really standout scene in this movie, but a lot of it's mostly just focused on like the gore and stuff like that. There is a side thing going on here where the main character has like a guilty conscience about something that happens earlier in the movie. That's a good trait to put into this, and the way that it like influences her later decisions is surprisingly well done on a character front. But for the most part, you can tell people are just here to get slaughtered, and as soon as characters get introduced, we know they're just here to get slaughtered. And it's one of those. And you could say, it's a slasher movie. That's a part of you wants that, for sure. But a lot of the greatest slasher movies are able to, like, balance that with suspense. And this one gets all of its suspense out pretty early, and then it gets to, all the gore. And the thing about that also is, I don't know if it's because they changed actresses or what, but I've noticed that you're supposed to. You know what I think the problem is the fact that because of this whole retconning thing, that nothing feels like canon anymore. Like every time we get a new horror movie in a franchise, more often than not it's going to be, oh, but you got to forget this stuff ever existed, and we're taking this stuff out of the story for this, and it's eventually somebody started comparing the Halloween movies to choose your own adventure stories, which is nice, but at the same time, your stakes are dead at that point. It's like you don't give a fuck what's going to happen because it could very well be retconned in the next movie. And so like it just really doesn't matter. Like nothing feels like it's the real story anymore. It's just like except for the original movies. And so that's yeah. So when you look at the fact that Sally is in this movie as a character, I don't know if it's that nothing feels like canon anymore thing, or if it's because it's a different actress or what. But I just really didn't feel any impact that Sally's in this. Not to, I mean, not to, you could say part of that's that she's just underutilized, which she absolutely is. But it's there's, but I could see that coming also in the in Halloween Kills, where in Halloween Kills they brought back a lot of the old faces from the original movie, not just Jamie Lee Curtis and Nick Castle, but I found that when those characters started meeting fates, that I didn't care. It just doesn't, like, none of it matters, because they just keep backpedaling. So yeah, this kind of falls into that trap also, where they've retconned enough at this point that it just doesn't. You don't really feel any particular weight, and it even gets to a point to where the movie doesn't. The movie's like so like it's almost like it's saying like it's for fans of the original, like because this is the original story. It's so you would think the people that are going into this would know the original very well, but the filmmakers get worried sometimes that you're not paying attention apparently. So we have her look at a picture of the old gang in the van, everybody that's dead now, and when she comes face to face with Leatherface, the first thing she does is say their names because she wants him to remember who he killed and who she loved. But when she says their names, we cut back to that picture, and it's like just trust us that we know what's going on here. Like even if we didn't already know these characters from a movie that we've already seen a million times before in the original. It's pretty clear, but that's what I was saying about Uncharted was there's even if it's just a little moment, if there's even just a little moment where it feels like the makers of the movie don't have trust in you to figure out what's happening, or are making movies for the short attention span people, which was a whole other conversation we've already had when Red Notice came out. I notice Netflix is always the repeat offender. It's yeah, there's a lot here that doesn't really work, but there's a surprising amount that does. So I was surprised by how much I was just kind of in the middle of this, because like for everything that really doesn't work, there's something that does. So it's pretty much just right in the middle for me. So I know there's a lot of people that seem to really take to it, and a lot of people that hated it. I mean, I can maybe see where the hate's coming from, but there's at least a couple of scenes in this that are too well done for me to fully buy that somebody would hate this movie to its core from beginning to end in every single scene. So I would defend it on that scene. So yeah, and like the more I think about it, the more it's like they didn't entirely fuck this up. And I know, once again, I know it's a very, very low bar, and it's giving it a lot of credit that it may or may not deserve. But yeah, there's some stuff they really, really pulled off, and some that they didn't. And that's pretty much where I land with this anyway. So now we can go into the last movie, which is Kimi, which is the new Steven Soderbergh movie that hit HBO Max. And I was kind of excited because his last movie to hit HBO Max, No Sudden Move, was a movie that I liked a lot. That a lot of people didn't seem to, even though I understood their criticisms, that it seemed kind of all over the place. This one's a lot more focused. This one's very, it's very focused and it's very brief. There was some mix-up with the runtime, and because I was worried going into this at first, because the first time I saw the runtime listed, I think it was on Wikipedia and IMDb, said 2 hours and 29 minutes. And I was like, that's kind of random, especially for a small Soderbergh movie, but okay, we'll see how he made an epic. And then when I started it on HBO Max, somebody messed up by an hour, because it is 1 hour and 29 minutes, which is much more suiting to what the movie actually is. And what's really great about this, especially if you're a Soderbergh fan, is if you're a fan of like the smaller Soderbergh stuff, to where he's able to take what seems like an almost kind of small budget movie, even if it has a big cast, but still add a lot of like action and tension in it. This movie was giving me vibes of like when he did Haywire and when he did like The Limey with Terrence Stamp. And it's definitely in line with those. Side effects you can probably throw in there also. It's like, I don't know if it's as artsy, I guess you could say, as Unsane, but it kind of feels like kind of in that same vein also. But for starters, this movie focuses a lot on confinement, where like at least the first 2/3 of its really short runtime are just in Zoe Kravitz's apartment, and you get the idea that she's... It really ties in current events quite well. We were just talking about how Texas Chainsaw was trying to be topical and it wasn't working out. But this one is topical in a way that is like so effortless in how the plot unfolds and what exactly is going on. That's really interesting. It uses COVID, it uses lockdown, and it uses the way we use technology now. It, like, all of the stuff that's going on right now, and shapes a thriller where all of this stuff connects perfectly and adds to this scenario, to make it as intense as it can get without, blowing up into some generic thriller. Unless maybe like the last 10 minutes you might say that. But overall, it's interesting how fresh it feels, because everything about the plot is really old-fashioned, where it's essentially... it essentially turns into the conversation, and it's got, Rear Window going on. But the way they utilize all this new stuff, whether it be new developments in real life or technology, where not only is she... Like, it's one of those cases where she seems to already be agoraphobic, because when it starts off, it's like, I wasn't sure if she was just afraid of going out because she'd been in lockdown too long, or if apparently she already had agoraphobia, and this was everything just sort of intensified. So we're in this, post-state with her now, where somebody who was already in bad shape is now in worse shape because of everything that we've all been through over the last 2 years. And then the way they utilize her job, which is one of those cases where it's... You talk about, like, commentary on privacy and stuff like that. And, like, intruding on privacy. Where she works for this company, because Kimi is essentially, like, Siri or Alexa or something like that. And she has this job where she listens in on recordings where somebody, activates Kimi and asks it something. And Zoe Kravitz's job is to, help Kimi figure out what they mean if they say something that's not quite computing. So she can go in and program it in real time as this person is asking for it. Essentially, hearing this, being able to hear a recording of this person in real time in their house. And the scary thing about that is that I was unsure whether this is a real job or not. Like, the fact that I even have to ask that question shows where we are, as far as this whole intrusion of privacy thing and the way where technology is with that right now. And then, of course, naturally, this will lead to the conversation kind of plot, or a blow up kind of plot, or blowout even, where she hears something that she's not supposed to. Paranoid thriller begins. It's a movie that we've seen before, but like I said, done in such a really fresh way with these new things coming into it, and these modern things coming into it. But also we know that Soderbergh, in his very super stylish way, without showing off too much, is handling this. Because it's another one of those cases where not only is he directing, but under his, pseudonyms, he's also the cinematographer and the editor. And he's somebody that you really get a sense has, a great hold on these movies. And David Koch, the great writer, is the guy that wrote it. And they're a really great combination. I said, reminds me a lot of his collaborations with Len Dovs. And these are all movies I feel like they could be like a great, like this, Haywire, and The Lineman could all be like a great triple feature. And this is like the a Soderbergh that I love that there's so many Soderberghs. I think we talked about that with No Sudden Move. And it's like when Soderbergh comes out with a new movie, you're never quite sure which Soderbergh you're getting, which is amazing. And I love the stuff that he's doing. And this is a Soderbergh in particular that I really love, where he's just so downplayed and modest, but telling a story just as strongly as he would if he had a really big budget, or was doing something really prestigious or something. But it's like this movie feels like it was made in such a very, very small way. Like it feels like this movie would have taken 5 days to make, if that. And it's amazing what you can accomplish with that. And with him, with just the way that he shoots, whether it be around the apartment, or the later scenes when the camera sort of follows her in this way that gives you that constant paranoia feeling. Like I said, that almost sounds like it'd be overbearing, but Soderbergh has so far beyond mastered not doing that. I think Soderbergh is the one that actually has the quote of, "It's not a director's job to stand in front of the camera and wave your arms and let the audience know that you're here and that you're doing your job. You just do your job completely invisibly." And the work speaks for itself, and that's exactly what he shows here. He shows here just how much he's really mastered that. And it's in the way that it focuses on isolation also, and just that whole idea of staying confined. But the crazy thing about that is that now that we have this whole thing about technology and the way that it works, how even somebody that's really in this confined place and doesn't leave is somehow still susceptible, and still vulnerable to attack, in whatever attack you want to call it. And I think what's really great about this also is Zoe Kravitz's performance, where at first she looks like like a Luc Besson character or something, but the way she portrays this, it's obviously she does the paranoia thing. That's going to be the obvious thing here, but it's what she does. Everything else that she does, it's particularly underlying under that paranoia also, where she's somebody that clearly you could say she's introverted, but this goes way beyond being introverted. What's going on with her, and you get this sense that there's that trauma has led to this, and it's the portrayal of people that are plagued with phobias has been seen in certain ways in media before, and the way that she plays it, this person that's plagued with phobias, is so real, and not this way that's this particular way that it might be viewed, somebody that's too afraid of, like Bob Wiley, essentially, Bill Murray and What About Bob is what people might imagine, to the point that it's comedic, but here it's you really get that sense, it almost for people that are plagued with constant phobias like myself, it's refreshing, and it's nice to actually see that portrayed in that way, to where she doesn't feel like a weak character because of her setbacks. and the way she handled that is really well done, and the fact that the way she sort of does start to toughen up as the movie gets in like its last third, does feel like there's a natural progression for her to get to that point. And there is some stuff here where I was talking about how I guess if there's one thing holding it back, it would be that the climax might be seen as a bit underwhelming. It's still very intense, but it feels like we get there kind of quickly, and there's stuff that kind of comes into it, like Devin Rattray is in this, Buzz from Home Alone, if you don't know him by name, and his character seems particularly underdeveloped, given his importance eventually. We're given like little clues to him, like we see him, but then what his purpose ends up being seems very sort of dropped on us, kind of from out of nowhere. So there's that, and then it does get very sort of generic thriller in the last 10 minutes, I suppose. But still, going into everything else, it's the way it really accomplishes this first part where she's in the apartment. Even though, the intensity just ramps up just very well as it goes on when we're heading towards our climax, and it's gripping the whole time. But here, it's like the way the build-up gets us to that point it should have just as much focus. There's a great Cliff Martinez score. It's great. Speaking of score, there is one particular thing going on here also where we talk about how she's alone but not alone. Another thing that kind of brings that to light is that there's construction going on underneath her in the building. And there's some really great scenes where the sound of the faint sound of that construction feels like it's working as like a score in itself, that can seemingly unintentionally add tension to scenes as they go on also. And stuff like that, stuff like where it's organic stuff that just kind of comes in and almost serves as aspects of filmmaking, is really great. So yeah, so overall, I like this quite a bit. Like if you see this and you like this sort of thing, I definitely recommend a lot of Soderbergh's movies that are like this, like Haywire and The Limey and stuff like that. Side Effects, Unsane to agree, I guess. So yeah, that's how I feel with that. And once again, the fact that Soderbergh remains this exciting is something that I can't get enough of, so that's great. So the next things are, we're going to talk about the Charlie Day movie, and Dog, and The Cursed, and I can't remember if there's something else. But that'll be the next thing after this, and we have SAG coming up, so we're going to talk about that. And we've got some Spirit Award predictions and all that stuff. A lot of award season stuff with these new releases kind of thrown in. And the Batman, obviously, is coming, of course, which I'll be reviewing with my brother. So we can look forward to that. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.